What happens when a routine traffic stop turns into a high-stakes battle between shadowy operatives, soldiers, and two small-town cops caught in the middle? This is the story of a mistaken bike, a mysterious rider, and a secret war that could change everything. It was a quiet Tuesday night in a small town just outside a military base in the American South. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few scattered cars and dim yellow streetlights that flickered on and off. Most of the town's residents were already home, either watching television or fast asleep. Nothing unusual ever really happened in this place, and that was exactly how the local police liked it. Officers Mike Daniels and Brian Keller were sitting in their patrol car near the old gas station on Route 14, sipping coffee and chatting about football. It had been a slow night, and they didn't expect anything exciting to come up. Just when Mike was about to suggest they call it a night and head back to the station, something caught his eye. A motorcycle speeding down the road, moving faster than any vehicle had a reason to at this hour. The bike was sleek, black, and almost silent except for a low, humming sound. The rider was dressed in black from head to toe and wore a full-face helmet with a dark visor. The strange thing was, the bike didn't have a license plate. That was more than enough reason to pull him over. Mike and Brian exchanged a quick glance. Without saying much, Mike started the engine and pulled out of the parking spot. They began, tailing the motorcycle, which didn't seem to notice them right away. As the bike neared the traffic light at the end of the road, Mike hit the siren. The red and blue lights flashed through the dark street. To their surprise, the motorcycle immediately slowed down and pulled over to the side. No hesitation. No attempt to escape. That was unusual. If someone was doing something illegal, like driving a stolen bike or hiding drugs, they'd normally run. But this guy didn't. The officers stepped out of the patrol car, hands resting lightly on their holsters. They had learned to be cautious. Mike approached the rider while Brian stayed a few steps behind, watching closely. "Evening," Mike said firmly. "License and registration, please." The rider said nothing. Instead, he slowly reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a thick black wallet. From it, he handed over a card. No driver's license, no state-issued ID, just a Department of Defense identification card. There was a name, a photo, and a military rank. But it looked different from anything the officers had seen before. Mike examined it carefully. "You military?" The rider nodded once, still silent. "Where's your plate?" Brian asked. No answer. "What's in the bag?" Mike continued, pointing to the large, tactical-looking backpack strapped to the back of the bike. Still the rider didn't speak. He remained calm, breathing evenly, eyes hidden behind his visor. There was no fear in his body language, no nervousness, no confusion. Just silence. Mike and Brian were now unsure what to think. The guy wasn't resisting, but he also wasn't cooperating fully. They had no way to confirm his identity, and without a license plate, they had reason to suspect the bike might be stolen. Something didn't feel right. Was this guy pretending to be military? Was this stolen valor? They had seen it before. People using fake military IDs to avoid trouble or get special treatment. "We need to see what's in the bag," Mike said, his voice harder now. The rider remained still for a second. Then, without saying anything, he unstrapped the backpack and handed it over. Mike placed it on the hood of the patrol car and carefully unzipped it. Inside, there were things the officers didn't recognize. Devices with antennas, encrypted-looking, gear, some kind of laptop with strange markings, and what looked like a military radio. Brian stared at it, confused. "What the hell is this?" Mike was getting more and more uncomfortable. This wasn't a drug dealer. This wasn't some joyrider. Whatever this was, it was way above their usual pay grade. "We're going to have to call this in," Mike muttered. He walked back to the car and picked up the radio. "Dispatch, we've got a situation on Route 14. Unidentified male, military gear, no plate, carrying strange equipment. possibly stolen valor or federal involvement, requesting backup and federal contact. Dispatch confirmed and said they would notify the regional FBI office to check the ID. Back at the scene, Brian noticed something strange. The rider, who had remained still all this time, was now holding a small radio device near his mouth. He said something quietly, too soft to hear, and then placed the device back on his belt. Brian raised an eyebrow. "What was that?" No answer. Mike returned from the patrol car. "Feds are being contacted. Until then, we'll keep him here." The officers were still trying to remain calm, but now their hands were hovering just a bit closer to their weapons. The silence, the strange gear, the unusual ID, the radio transmission. Something was going on. Mike decided to cuff the man until they got more answers. "All right, stand up. Hands behind your back." The rider slowly obeyed. He didn't resist. Mike cuffed him and had him sit on the curb. They placed the backpack on the ground beside him and stood nearby, watching, unsure what to make of the situation. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The street was silent again, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant sound of crickets. Then, in the distance, Brian heard it. A low rumble. Faint at first, like thunder, but it grew louder. Mike heard it too. They looked up and saw headlights, many headlights approaching fast. "What the—" Out of the darkness, one Humvee appeared. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, a convoy of military vehicles rolled into the scene like something out of a war movie. There were at least 10 Humvees, possibly more, each one packed with uniformed soldiers. The vehicles stopped in perfect formation, blocking the road on both sides. Mike and Brian stood frozen. They instinctively reached for their radios, but before they could say a word, the door of the lead Humvee opened. Out stepped a tall man in an army captain's uniform. He moved with confidence, his face serious and his pace fast. Soldiers began, stepping out of the other vehicles, surrounding the area with quiet, practiced efficiency. No shouting, no confusion. Just military precision. The captain approached Mike and Brian. "Which one of you is in charge here?" he asked sharply. Mike, stunned, stepped forward. "I am." "You've detained a special operations officer. He's on active classified duty. You need to release him immediately." Mike blinked. "We had no idea who he was. He didn't explain anything. No license plate, no answers. We called the FBI." The captain looked him straight in the eye. "He wasn't authorized to explain. He's in the middle of a covert test. You shouldn't have stopped him." Brian stepped in. "We were just doing our job." "I'm not saying you weren't," the captain replied, "but now you're involved in something you shouldn't be. And you need to step back." The soldiers moved to the rider and removed the cuffs. The man stood up, completely calm, and nodded at the captain. He picked up his backpack and walked toward one of the Humvees without saying a word. The captain gave a final look to the officers. "Next time, check before you detain someone with federal clearance," he said. "We'll handle this from here." Then, as quickly as they came, the soldiers returned to their vehicles. Engines roared to life. Tires rolled over gravel, and within minutes, the entire convoy had disappeared down the road, leaving the two officers standing alone in the dark. Mike didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did Brian. Finally, Mike looked at his partner and said, "What the hell just happened?" Brian shook his head slowly. "I think we just stopped the wrong guy." They stood in silence, still trying to process everything. The man on the motorcycle had never once raised his voice, never threatened, never ran. He had followed every order, and yet within minutes he had summoned an entire military unit to his defense. Mike exhaled. "We need to write one hell of a report." Neither of them knew it yet, but this one mistake would set off a chain of events that would pull in the FBI, the Pentagon, and eventually even national news media. But for now, in the cool silence of the night, all they could do was try to understand how one routine stop had turned into something that felt more like a scene from a spy thriller. The two officers stood quietly for a moment, both shaken by the convoy that had come and gone like a ghost army. The night air felt heavier now. The rider on the motorcycle had been released by the soldiers without saying a single word to the officers who had stopped him. The captain had spoken for him. The rider never once raised his voice, never explained anything. He just waited. Mike and Brian sat back inside their patrol car, trying to process what had just happened. They weren't angry. They were confused. Deeply confused. Who was that man? What was he carrying? And why did the military respond with such speed and force? Should we even write this up? Brian asked, looking over at Mike. Mike nodded slowly. We have to. But we leave out the part where 50 soldiers show up in Humvees. No one's going to believe that anyway. Brian laughed nervously. You think he was CIA? I don't know, Mike replied. But he's not just some random soldier. Across town, while the officers tried to make sense of it all, the man on the motorcycle sat quietly in the back of a Humvee as it rolled down an unlit dirt road, deep into the woods behind the military base. The other soldiers in the vehicle didn't speak to him. They didn't need to. They knew who he was. His name was never used, not even in the documents. He was simply referred to as Operative Viper. He was part of a highly classified military unit that tested prototype communication, equipment, surveillance tech, and emergency response tools under real-world conditions. Everything he carried that night, the encrypted laptop, the advanced radio, the strange antennas, was part of a new system being evaluated for special forces use. Viper had been tasked with a 36-hour field simulation. His mission was to ride through 3 civilian zones near the base, carrying the equipment undetected, maintaining secure communication with a remote command station. He was to record signal strength, GPS reliability, and response times, all without revealing his identity. The mission was going well until the moment he saw red and blue lights flashing in his rearview mirror. He had been trained for this. He knew not to speak unless absolutely necessary. He also knew not to resist, because that could ruin the entire operation. So he followed orders. Let them detain him. And at the right moment he used his secure radio to send a coded message. OP-7. Stopped. Protocol Viper 6. Emergency override. That message triggered an alert deep inside the restricted section of the base. Within 4 minutes, a rapid response unit was mobilized. The captain in charge of the project, who had been monitoring Viper's signal from the base command post, authorized direct extraction. What the police officers didn't know was that the bag they had casually placed on the hood of their car contained more than just fancy radios. It held a prototype that could transmit secure satellite data in low-signal environments, a tool that could someday save lives in combat zones. The gear was worth more than $10 million and was being tested for deployment with elite special operations teams. When the convoy reached the command center, Viper stepped out, saluted the captain, and walked into a debriefing room. The door closed. Behind him. He removed his helmet, revealing a scar that ran down his right cheek. His face was calm, eyes sharp, and jaw clenched in quiet tension. The captain sat across from him. "Report," he said. Viper spoke for the first time in hours. Stopped by 2 local officers. No threat. Equipment secured. Contact was minimal. Radio override activated at 0022 hours. Extraction completed at 0037. The captain nodded. Did they access anything? No. They looked in the bag, but didn't touch the core systems. Did you speak? Only to comply. The captain leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh. This wasn't supposed to happen. Local PD wasn't on the clearance list. Somebody forgot to update them. Viper didn't respond. He knew this kind of thing happened. Miscommunication between federal, state, and local agencies was a common issue. The rules said local police weren't supposed to interfere, but without clear communication, they had no way of knowing. Viper didn't blame the officers. They had done their job. Meanwhile, at the local police station, Mike and Brian sat at their desks, going over body cam footage and writing their reports. The chief had already heard about the incident. He was half amused, half worried. "You sure you didn't make this up?" the chief asked. Mike shook his head. "You can see the video. He gave us a military ID, but the type, I've never seen one like that before. He had gear we couldn't identify. Then 20 minutes later, soldiers show up and take him away like it's a rescue mission." The chief frowned. "Feds haven't said anything yet?" "Not yet," Brian answered. The chief sighed. "Let's just sit on this report for now. If they reach out, we'll cooperate. Otherwise, forget it ever happened." But they couldn't forget. Brian kept going back to that moment when the writer reached for his small radio and said something under his breath. Whatever he said, it had worked. It had triggered something. Something powerful. Later that week, Mike did a little digging out of curiosity. He checked traffic cams to see where the writer had come from, but the cameras had blacked out at the exact time he passed by. The footage was missing. Not corrupted. Not malfunctioning. Just gone. He checked again later, and all camera logs from that street had been remotely wiped clean. That's when he realized. They weren't dealing with some regular military operator. This guy was part of something far deeper. Back at the base, the captain was in a meeting with higher command. They reviewed the footage, the reports, the response time. One officer from the Pentagon, speaking on a secure line, asked, "Should we discipline the officers?" The captain shook his head. "No. They were doing their job. It's our fault for not coordinating with local authorities. But next time, we include them. Quietly." As for Viper, he was assigned a new mission within 48 hours. The incident with the local police was marked as a field anomaly in the official logs. It would not be made public. He didn't need rest. He didn't complain. His job wasn't about comfort. It was about precision, loyalty, and trust. But even inside the base, people began whispering about the event. Some called him the Ghost Rider. Others just called him the Man in Black. Nobody dared ask for his real name. A week later, Brian received a mysterious letter in his mailbox at the station. It was unmarked and unsealed. Inside was a note written on thick white paper with no header. "Your professionalism was noted. Protocol prevents full explanation. Know this, you acted with integrity. Your presence ensured the test was completed. Under stress conditions. Well done." There was no signature, just a small silver coin inside the envelope with a strange symbol engraved on it. A winged dagger over a globe. Brian stared at it for a long time. He didn't show it to anyone. He just placed it in his locker and never spoke about it again. Mike never received a letter, but one morning, he found that his patrol car had a brand new communication unit installed, twice as advanced as the one issued by the department. No one knew where it came from. The city said it didn't come from them. There was no bill, no explanation. And just like that, the strange incident faded into silence. No news report covered it. No higher authority followed up. It was as if it never happened. But for the two officers who stood on that empty road that night, it would remain the strangest call of their careers. They never saw the rider again. But somewhere, in a dark part of the world, he was out there. Silent, invisible, and always watching. 2 weeks passed since the strange encounter between the local police officers and the silent rider, who had vanished into the night with a military convoy. Officer Mike Daniels had gone back to his normal routine, patrolling the quiet roads and writing tickets for speeding or expired tags. But deep inside, he knew something had shifted. The rider, the mysterious gear, the soldiers. It wasn't something that faded away like a forgotten memory. It stayed. Brian, his partner, was quieter than usual. He often stared out the window. During their patrols, his mind drifting back to that night. Neither of them talked about it much anymore. It was like an unspoken agreement between them. What they had seen was too strange, too unexplained, and possibly too dangerous to dig deeper into. But one Tuesday morning, something strange happened again. At exactly 9:14 a.m., the police station received an anonymous tip. It came through a secure line usually reserved for federal agencies. The caller didn't give a name or any background, only a short message. Suspicious package placed behind gas station on Route 14. Do not engage. Secure the area and wait. The dispatcher paused for a moment, then forwarded the message to Mike and Brian, who were already patrolling nearby. They arrived at the gas station within minutes. Everything seemed normal. Cars came and went. A few people filled their tanks. A man in a red baseball cap sipped coffee on the bench outside. But behind the station, next to the trash bins, sat a medium-sized black case. It looked military, rugged, locked, with a metal tag hanging from its handle. Mike looked at Brian. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Brian nodded. "Same style as that rider's backpack." The tag on the case had a small symbol on it, just like the one on the coin Brian had received in the mail. A winged dagger over a globe. Mike called for backup and ordered the station to be cleared quietly, without alarming the public. Within 10 minutes, yellow tape surrounded the area, and the bomb squad was on its way. But before they arrived, a black SUV pulled up. No sirens, no logos. Two men stepped out, clean-shaven, short hair, suits that looked too expensive for a town like this. One showed a federal badge without a word. The other simply said, "We'll take it from here." The case was lifted into the SUV, and within seconds they were gone. No signatures, no paper trail. Just like before, Mike and Brian stood in silence. "That wasn't a threat," Brian said softly. "It was a message." Mike looked over. "From who?" "I think we both know." That night, back at home, Brian pulled out the silver coin again and stared at it. He turned it over in his hand slowly, trying to decide if he should just let it go. Forget everything. Move on like nothing ever happened. But he couldn't. Not yet, somewhere far away, across state lines and hidden deep inside a classified government facility. The man they once stopped, the silent rider, was in another debriefing room. The lights were dim. A projector showed satellite images, heat maps, and surveillance footage. This wasn't just a test anymore. Something had changed. The base commander entered the room and sat down across from Viper, the rider's code name. He was no longer in a helmet, no longer dressed in black. Just a simple gray tactical uniform with no name tags. "You were right," the commander said. "They're testing our network. Someone's intercepting low-signal transmissions near civilian zones." Viper remained still. He listened closely. "The device you carried, the one the officers saw, picked up multiple pings from an unknown source just before they stopped you. You weren't being tracked by the police. You were being tracked by someone else." Viper's jaw tightened slightly. "We've narrowed it down to a pattern," the commander continued. "Whoever is doing this isn't a hostile nation. They're not using satellites. They're piggybacking on civilian Wi-Fi and roadside camera systems. Every time you enter an unprotected area, they try to locate you." "Why?" Viper finally asked. "That's what we're trying to find out. But we believe someone is targeting our field tests, testing us while we're testing the gear." The room went quiet. Then the commander leaned forward. "We want you to go out again. Same bike, same gear. But this time, we're not just testing equipment. We're using you as bait." Viper nodded once. He didn't need to ask questions. He understood the mission. Meanwhile, back in the small town, strange things began to happen. Security cameras at local gas stations began malfunctioning. Police radio channels picked up static bursts, sharp and coded, repeating at odd intervals. Some officers reported interference on their phones. One officer even said he saw a small drone flying above the courthouse late at night, but by the time anyone responded, it was gone. Mike and Brian were the first to connect the dots. "It's happening again," Mike whispered one night as they sat in their car on patrol. "Same road, same patterns. Except this time, we're not the only ones watching." Brian pulled out a folded piece of paper from his notebook. He had written down the frequency of one of the strange static bursts they had picked up earlier. It had repeated 5 times, then stopped. He had recorded it on his phone and ran it through an online tool, just to see what would happen. What came out shocked him. It wasn't random static. It was a coded message, a GPS coordinate. He looked it up. The location? A warehouse on the edge of town that had been abandoned for over a year. "We need to check it out," Brian said, his voice low and steady. Mike hesitated. "We should call it in first. They'll cover it up." "You think we're in the middle of something big?" "I think we were dragged into something by mistake," Brian replied. "And now we have to choose, walk away or find out what's going on." Mike sighed, then turned the wheel. "Let's go." The warehouse was quiet when they arrived. Dust covered the windows. A rusted gate hung open, but there were fresh tire tracks on the gravel, and the chain that once locked the entrance had been recently cut and loosely draped back over the fence. Someone had been here. They moved quietly, flashlights sweeping across the floor. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty, except for one room in the back that had a thick metal door. It was slightly open. Inside was a setup they didn't expect. Computers, wires, satellite antennas, maps with pins, screens showing local roadways, heat sensors, and camera feeds from traffic lights and gas stations. Brian moved toward one of the monitors. "This is surveillance," he whispered. "But not from the government. These guys are tracking something, or someone." Just then a screen flashed red. It showed a moving dot. A vehicle. Then a label appeared under the dot, "Viper." In transit, Mike's eyes widened. "They're tracking him again." Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the warehouse. Someone was coming. Mike and Brian turned off their flashlights and ducked behind. A crate. A man entered the room, wearing all black with a headset on. He walked to the computer, typed quickly, and spoke into his mic. "Target is live. Extraction team should be ready in 20. Brian looked at Mike. "This isn't just about tech. They're trying to intercept him." They waited until the man walked out again, then carefully left the warehouse and returned to their car. Brian took a deep breath. "We have to warn him," Mike nodded. "But how do we reach someone who doesn't want to be found?" Back at the base, Viper was already in motion. He had just received the mission update. New route, higher risk, real surveillance. The moment his tires hit the road, the chase would begin. Not from law enforcement this time, but from unknown players with high-level access and a dangerous motive. What they didn't know was that this time, Viper wasn't alone. The military had set up hidden observers, snipers in buildings, unmarked SUVs in parking lots, drones in the sky. Every move would be recorded, and any sign of interception would lead to an instant response. But they hadn't counted on Mike and Brian. Using a police radio channel that wasn't monitored by higher agencies, the 2 officers sent a coded message. It was simple, short, and risky. "Rider in black. You're not alone. They're watching. They know your path." Message from 14. They didn't know if it would reach him, but they had to try. 2 hours later, Viper's bike moved swiftly through the edge of town, just past the old train tracks. He was aware of everything. His ears listened to the tiny earpiece under his helmet, which had gone silent for nearly 10 minutes. Too silent. Then, suddenly, a single burst came through. A local police signal. Weak but clear. He heard it, Viper. Made a hard left turn, leaving the planned route. Instantly, the silent observers in the warehouse panicked. The man in black grabbed his mic. "Target has diverted. Repeat, target diverted." But it was too late. Military trackers were already locked on. Viper continued down the dirt road toward an old airfield where a new backup team waited. His bike moved like lightning, tires gliding over gravel. Behind him, two black SUVs began pursuit, but they weren't military. A short chase followed, but it ended fast. A flash grenade, a military drone drop, a clean takedown. The men in the warehouse were caught. The setup was seized. And just like that, the small-town police became part of something they never imagined. Mike and Brian received a formal thank you. Not public, not written, just a quiet handshake from the same captain who had shown up weeks earlier. "You're not supposed to be part of this," he said. Mike smiled. "Too late." The captain nodded. "You helped stop something before it started." After the tense events on Route 14 and the surprising encounter at the abandoned warehouse, life seemed to settle down again for officers Mike and Brian. But deep down, they both knew the calm wouldn't last. Something bigger was still out there, hidden behind layers of secrecy and shadows. For Mike, the days after the mission were filled with restless nights. He kept replaying everything in his mind: the strange rider, the sudden arrival of soldiers, the mysterious package, and the men in black who almost intercepted Viper's mission. His police duties felt small compared to what he had stumbled into. Every time he drove through town, his eyes scanned the streets and alleyways, half expecting to see someone watching. Brian, on the other hand, tried to hold on to a sense of normalcy. He buried himself in paperwork, training exercises, and community meetings. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pulled deeper into something beyond their control. The silver coin in his locker reminded him of the thin line they had crossed. One afternoon, while Mike was finishing a report at the station, his radio crackled to life with an unexpected call. It was from the captain who had first led the military convoy that night. "Daniels?" The captain's voice was low and urgent. "Meet me at the base. We need to talk." Mike's heart quickened. He glanced at Brian, who nodded silently, understanding the gravity. They drove to the military base together, their police badges tucked away to avoid unwanted attention. At the base's secure briefing room, the captain greeted them with a serious expression. "There's been a development," he said. "The test with Viper wasn't just a routine exercise. Someone inside our ranks leaked information. The men in black you saw were operatives trying to steal classified technology. They're part of a larger network." Mike frowned. "How large?" The captain hesitated. "Large enough that we believe it extends beyond this country. Some foreign agents, others rogue contractors, all working together. They want to cripple our communications and surveillance capabilities." Brian asked. "How do we fit into this?" The captain looked at them. "Both. You're the only local law enforcement officers who came close to the operation without compromising it. Your actions helped contain the breach. But now, you're targets too." Mike's stomach twisted. "Targets?" The captain nodded. "Yes. The network is watching. They want to silence anyone who knows too much." From that moment, Mike and Brian's world changed completely. They were no longer just town cops. They were part of a covert operation to protect national security. Their patrols became surveillance missions. Their phones were tapped by friendly forces. Their homes were discreetly monitored to ensure their safety. They learned how to use encrypted communication apps, how to recognize surveillance tactics, and how to keep themselves invisible. Their training sessions became intense: cover drills, quick escapes, and spotting suspicious behavior. One night, Mike received an encrypted message on his phone. "Move to safe location. Extraction pending." Brian was already waiting in Mike's living room when the text arrived. "We can't stay here," Mike said. They packed light bags with essentials and left through the back door. A black SUV was waiting down the street, unmarked and silent. Inside were two men in plain clothes who introduced themselves only as liaisons. The drive to the extraction point was quiet. The city lights faded behind them as they headed to a remote safe house miles outside town. Inside the safe house, the captain joined them via video call. "We've identified a new threat. The network is planning a major operation to intercept one of our key communication satellites." Brian leaned forward, concerned. "If they succeed, it could cripple military operations." "That's the plan," the captain replied. "And you two might be our last line of defense." Over the next several days, Mike and Brian worked closely with intelligence agents. They helped analyze patterns of suspicious activity, unusual phone calls, hacked databases, and strange movements near communication towers. One night, while reviewing satellite data, Brian noticed a cluster of anomalies near a remote mountain range. The signals were consistent with attempts to jam or hack satellite frequencies. Mike contacted the captain. "We should investigate on the ground." The captain agreed but warned, "Be careful. This network has eyes everywhere." They assembled a small team, 2 military operatives, a tech specialist, and themselves, and traveled to the mountains. The terrain was rugged, and the air grew colder as they climbed higher. At the base of a cliff, they discovered a hidden facility. It was disguised as a weather station but housed powerful jamming equipment. The team observed from a distance, noting guards and cameras. Mike and Brian coordinated with air support and a special forces squad for an overnight raid. The mission was delicate. If the network learned of their approach, the equipment could be destroyed. Under cover of darkness, the raid began. The special forces team moved swiftly, disabling guards and securing the perimeter. Mike and Brian entered the facility, scanning for the jamming devices. Inside, the equipment hummed with power. Brian hacked into the system, downloading data, while Mike stood watch. Suddenly, alarms blared. The network had detected the breach. The team fought back as reinforcements arrived. It became a fierce battle between the special forces and the network's mercenaries. In the chaos, Mike spotted a man running towards a control panel, attempting to launch a missile to destroy the facility. Without hesitation, Mike tackled him, wrestling the detonator away. Brian finished the download just in time. The team secured the area, calling for extraction. Back at the safe house, the captain reviewed the data. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "The network has multiple cells across the country. Their goal is to disrupt communication during a critical military operation." Mike and Brian realized the fight was far from over. They had exposed a key part of the network but knew more battles awaited. Over the following weeks, their lives became a blend of normal police work and secret missions. They attended briefings, trained in new tactics, and coordinated with intelligence agencies. Their families noticed the changes: late nights, sudden disappearances, nervousness. But Mike and Brian kept the truth hidden for their protection. One afternoon, while on patrol, Brian received a call from an unknown number. The voice was distorted but clear. "We know what you've done. Stop now or face consequences." Brian felt a chill. "We won't stop." The line went dead. They reported the call to the captain, who assured them increased protection was in place. Despite the threats, Mike and Brian remained determined. They were no longer just officers in a small town. They were guardians of a fragile peace, standing between shadowy forces and the safety of their country. The mysterious rider, Viper, remained a symbol of the unseen battles fought every day. Though they never saw him again, his mission and sacrifice inspired them to continue. As the network's plans unfolded, Mike and Brian prepared for whatever came next, ready to face the unknown with courage and resolve. The tension in the air was thick. Months had passed since the raid on the hidden mountain facility, and Mike and Brian were caught in the middle of an ongoing war they never asked to join. The small town they once called home now felt like the front line of a secret battle. The network, the shadowy group trying to steal military secrets and disrupt national security, was still out there, watching, planning, and striking from the darkness. Mike and Brian had changed too. They weren't just police officers anymore. They were part of something bigger. something dangerous. Their days were a mix of routine patrols and covert missions. Every call could be a trap. Every stranger could be a spy. Every quiet street might hide secrets. But they carried on, knowing that the safety of many depended on them. One cold evening, as dusk painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, Mike received a coded message on his secured phone. It was brief but clear. Operation Midnight. Full. Lockdown. Be ready. The message came from the captain at the military base, the same man who had pulled them into this hidden war. Mike and Brian met at their usual spot, a small diner just outside town. The place was almost empty, but the weight of what was coming pressed down on them. They didn't speak much. Words felt useless. Instead, they reviewed the latest intel on their phones, locations, suspects, plans. The network had escalated. They were no longer just trying to steal information. They were preparing for an all-out assault on the country's communication systems. Their goal was to cripple military satellites, cut off emergency response networks, and plunge key cities into chaos. The military and intelligence agencies had identified several potential targets: satellite uplinks, data centers, communication towers. If the network succeeded, it would be catastrophic. Mike and Brian's role was critical. They were assigned to protect a small remote data center in the heart of their region. The place was unremarkable, just a plain building surrounded by trees and fences. But inside, it housed vital technology that linked military commands across the nation. The night of the operation arrived. The sky was clear, the stars bright. Mike, Brian, and a team of military and federal agents surrounded the data center. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew this could be a trap. Suddenly, their radios crackled with a warning. Hostile units approaching from the east. Estimated arrival, 5 minutes. Mike's heart pounded. He checked his gear, rifle, radio, body armor, and took a deep breath. Brian did the same, his eyes sharp and alert. The first headlights appeared on the dirt road. Black SUVs, fast and silent, moved with purpose. Mike raised his rifle, signaling the team to hold their positions. The attackers were mercenaries hired by the network, well-trained, heavily armed, and desperate. The battle erupted in the dark. Gunfire cracked through the night. Explosions shook the ground. Mike and Brian took cover behind concrete barriers, returning fire with precision. The mercenaries tried to breach the building, planting explosives at key points. But the defenders held strong. Amid the chaos, Mike spotted a figure moving quickly toward the main entrance. A man dressed in black tactical gear, carrying a device resembling a remote control. Mike shouted a warning to Brian, then sprinted forward. The man was the same type they had seen before, the shadow operative trying to sabotage the data center. Mike tackled him just as he pressed a button. The device beeped, but nothing happened. The explosives were disarmed moments before detonation. Brian joined them, securing the man in handcuffs. They searched him and found encrypted USB drives containing plans and codes for future attacks. The battle continued for over an hour, with reinforcements arriving just in time to push the mercenaries back. By dawn, the attackers had been defeated or captured. The data center was safe. As the sun rose, casting golden light over the weary team, Mike and Brian stood side by side, exhausted but victorious. Back at the military base, the captain praised their courage and quick thinking. "You stopped a major attack tonight. The country owes you both a debt." But Mike shook his head. "We didn't do it alone. It was a team effort," Brian added. "And it's far from over. The network will strike again. We have to stay ready." The captain nodded solemnly. "Agreed. But for now you've earned a moment of peace." That moment, however, was short-lived. 2 days later, Mike's phone buzzed with another encrypted message. New intel. High-risk target identified. Location? Undisclosed. Proceed with caution. The message was vague but clear. The network was still active. Still dangerous, Mike and Brian knew they had to act fast. They began tracking unusual activity, encrypted, phone calls, strange internet traffic, and suspicious vehicles spotted near critical infrastructure. Their investigation led them to a secluded farmhouse several miles from town. The place looked abandoned, but surveillance revealed frequent visitors, men and women carrying equipment, loading trucks. Mike and Brian planned a stealth operation to gather evidence and identify the people behind the network. One night, under the cover of darkness, they approached the farmhouse. Using night vision goggles, they spotted armed guards and high-tech gear. Inside, computers hummed with activity. Screens displayed maps, surveillance feeds, and communications intercepts. Brian whispered, "This is their command center." Mike nodded. "We need to call for backup, but quietly." Before they could radio the base, a guard noticed movement outside and raised the alarm. The team scrambled to find cover as alarms blared and searchlights swept the area. Gunfire erupted again. Mike and Brian exchanged quick glances. They had to get out, but not before downloading critical data from the network's computers. Brian quickly plugged in a USB drive and began copying files. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them. A guard had broken through a door. Mike grabbed Brian's arm. "Time to go!" They raced out the back, dodging bullets and leaping over fences. Outside, waiting vehicles sped toward them. Mike and Brian jumped into an unmarked van and sped away, hearts pounding. Back at the safe house, the team examined the data Brian had recovered. It revealed shocking details: a global network of operatives, plans to target multiple cities, and a timeline for coordinated attacks. The information was a breakthrough. With this new intel, the military launched a series of coordinated raids across the country. Mike and Brian joined the efforts, traveling to different states to assist local law enforcement. Their work was dangerous but vital. Through it all, their bond grew stronger. They depended on each other for support and strength. Despite the constant threats, they found moments of humanity, laughing over coffee, sharing stories of their lives before all this began. One evening, as they returned to their small town, Mike looked at Brian and said, "Do you ever think about going back to a normal life?" Brian smiled sadly. "Sometimes, but I know we can't." "Not anymore." Mike nodded. "We've seen too much," Brian added. "But maybe that's okay, because what we're doing matters." Their work continued, a quiet, war fought in the shadows. The mysterious writer, Viper, became a legend among them, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Though they never saw him again, his mission lived on in their actions. As the sun set on their town, Mike and Brian stood watch, ready for whatever came next. Because in a world full of secrets and danger, some heroes don't wear capes. They just answer the call.